Everyone can hear me? So sometimes there are warning signs, and sometimes there are not. When I was younger, I feel like I was a really trusting person, even kind of naive. So it's taken me a while for life to really teach me to trust my intuition. For me, it's kind of a feeling in my gut that tells me something's not quite right. Sometimes it's even like a cold chill that comes down my spine and through my arms into my fingertips. And I can't seem to stop it. But sometimes it's not that easy. Sometimes that doesn't show up. When I first went away to college, I didn't know that I'd be fighting one of the hardest battles of my life. Because you see, it's really hard to fight an enemy that you can't even identify. So it only took me a couple short months into my first year to realize that there was a pretty toxic culture on my campus. We'd kind of developed this epidemic, if you will, of sexual assault. And many of my friends were coming to me, telling me these stories, telling me all these horrible things that had happened to them, one after another, till I couldn't even count them all on two hands. And some of them were really violent, and others were just confused because they couldn't remember what had happened to them. And eventually, I had my own story. And it was really difficult because you just didn't know who to trust. First, you thought you knew a guy, he was a friend of yours, you thought you could trust him, you'd go places with him, and just when you started to trust him, he'd attack. And so if your intuition didn't kick in and tell you anything, you just accidentally ran into a monster. And for me, I took solace in at least knowing that I sort of remembered. I think I said no. And the hardest part about this was that you still had to go to school with your monster. There weren't any consequences. Nobody was getting expelled. Nobody was getting kicked out of school. It was just boys will be boys and maybe a day suspension. So you'd walk down the hallway and you'd run into him and you'd see him smiling with friends. And for me, that meant luckily not graduating, at least with him, because he was a year ahead of me. But it did mean running into him. I'd just walk out of a class like a normal day, not expecting anything different, and there he'd be standing there just looking at me. And every single time he'd smirk at me, like he knew that his presence made me sick. And I would just start going into a panic. I couldn't breathe. I felt like somebody kicked me in the chest. I'd make as fast as I could down the hallway to the closest bathroom, lock myself up in wherever I could, and just wait for it to pass and hope I didn't get sick so I could get myself together and go back to class. For many women, I knew this was a regular occurrence, so a lot of people just decided to leave campus altogether. And so this was also a time of awakening for me, luckily. I was also taking women's studies classes for the first time in my life. I was learning about feminism, and I was hanging out with, I guess you could call it the wrong crowd. I was hanging out with the ladies on campus who ran the Women's Center. So we all started hanging out all the time and doing programming and such. And eventually, just in talking, I realized a lot of them had their stories too. So we got ourselves together and decided we're going to do something to fight back. Because they'd been trying for years, by the way. A lot of these ladies were seniors, and I was just a freshman. They'd been trying petitions and meeting with the president and doing all this crazy stuff, and nothing was working. So it kind of came to a boiling point. So we went rogue. This is in the days before social media. So there was an actual physical Facebook, if anybody remembers, and a yearbook, if you will, with your picture and then underneath your name and your year and all that. So we took that book, we cut out all the pictures of all the guys that we knew that were assaulting women on campus, our personal monsters, and we blew them up like wanted signs on flyers with their picture and their name underneath and a big fat sign that read, "Is a rapist." And we posted them in the middle of the night all over campus, so that in the morning, everyone found them all over the place. And it was all everybody could talk about. And it also fueled us to do something bigger. If we could do that, we could do anything. So we got ourselves organized with a big group. We decided to do a protest. And we placed ourselves like an encampment right in the front of campus where everyone could see us strategically, especially visitors, with a big fat sign that said, "Hungry for justice." And we started a hunger strike. And for 3 days, we didn't eat anything, we just drank water. We held our ground, and by the third day, our group had tripled in size, and even professors were holding class at the protest site in solidarity with us. We felt so empowered. It was the first time I didn't feel anymore like a victim. I felt like a survivor, like I was doing something about this. And of course, the local media caught wind of it, and eventually, the president had to meet with us, right? And he did. And luckily, he gave in to all of our demands, including our most important, a zero tolerance policy that read that if you were found responsible for assaulting someone, you would be expelled. And it felt amazing, except that it wasn't a full solution. Fortunately, you also have to pair that with a lot of culture changes, right? So by our senior year, a couple of us, close friends, had moved out to this apartment off campus, mostly to save money, right? But also, for me personally, it just felt like a really safe space because we could control who came and went and who we invited to parties and who we talked to there, right? So I started to build up this kind of sense of safety in our new home. Until one night, when a friend of a friend invited a group of guys over. And from the very minute they walked in the door, my intuition went off like a fire alarm. I, for some reason, just couldn't shake this feeling like I didn't like these guys, and I had nothing against them. I'd never even met them before. But I didn't like the way they were joking, I didn't like the way they were drinking, and I especially didn't like the way they were paying a lot of attention to one of my roommates. Well, come to find out there was a reason for that feeling, because later on down the night, we figured out that they were actually mixing harder alcohol like tequila and stuff with the beer that people were drinking, because they thought it was funny. And so my friend that they were paying a lot of attention to was very quickly very intoxicated. My roommate took her back to her room, for safety, and laid her down so she could sleep it off, but quite frankly, she passed out. She was out cold. So she left her there for safety, closed the door, and came and talked to me and told me what had happened. And I wasn't shocked, but I was also really upset, and I said, we gotta kick these guys out. We were trying to think of a way to go and ask them to leave, even though they were friends of friends. And as we're talking, we're thinking, you know what? Let's go check on her. So we go down the hall, and we go check on her, and the minute we open the door, there he was. One of those guys was hovering over her with his pants already down around his ankles, climbing on top of her. And luckily, we walked in when we did because nothing had happened yet. And she was out cold, so she had no clue what was happening. But I felt some kind of a rage come over me, so I couldn't even think straight. Things sounded muffled. Everything became a blur, but I just grabbed him and I threw him across the room as hard as I could. He hit the wall and bounced off like a rag doll. And he was reaching for his pants, struggling, trying to get up or whatever. And my friend was yelling something to me, but I couldn't make out what she was saying. And I grabbed him again by his shirt, pulled him down to the ground, and just started dragging him all the way down the hallway, out the door of the apartment, down the steps, all the way to the street. And I threw him as hard as I could into the street. And his friends had caught wind of what was happening. They decided to leave him behind. They'd already gotten in their car, were ready to take off, when suddenly they see him fly out into the street, so they pull up and they grab him, pull him into their car, and take off as fast as they can. And that's when I realized safety is not something that you can control in a place. Safety is our behavior. It's the way we treat each other, the way we take care of each other and take care of ourselves. And so it couldn't be controlled in an apartment. And wouldn't it be nice if we lived in a place where we wouldn't have to be looking for monsters all the time? Wouldn't it be nice if everyone could pitch in to identify these monsters and, better yet, educate people so they don't become monsters in the first place? I know I'd like to live in a place like that, because women are constantly watching their backs everywhere they go. I don't want to carry my keys in my hand ready to hit somebody in case they try to attack me. I don't want to park under a light every night. But we do it all the time. Wouldn't it be nice if we lived in a place where women don't have to feel like they're solely responsible for all of their safety all of the time? I'd like to live in a place like that. I'd like to live in a place where I don't feel like I have to constantly look for red flags. Thank you.
Wow.